shoe is better to hoop in? The Adidas Harden Volume 6 or the Harden Volume 5? Today we're going to be putting the two newest models from James Harden's shoe line with Adidas head to head to see how they compare. But really quick, if this is your first time checking us out, feel free to drop a follow or subscribe wherever you're watching and give this video a like. We would greatly appreciate that. But taking a quick look at the box and price, you're going to get that HV.VI show up on the front of the Harden Volume 6, which is what it stands for. It's just, kind of a weird way to break that up. But you're also going to get some splotches all over this box. That's going to give these a similar look to the Harden Volume 5 box, which is just going to have those multicolored dots kind of all over it. But, as for pricing, the Harden 6s are retailing for $140, which isn't a bad price for a sixth signature shoe. And it is a $10 price increase, though, from the Harden 5s, which retailed for $130. But, still two pretty average shoes as far as pricing goes. So taking a quick look at the appearance for these and starting off with the colorways, today we're checking out the Adidas Harden Volume 6 Mist Aqua versus the Harden Volume 5 Polka Dot Team White. So aside from the same general shoe height and mold, there were some changes made to these models. So for the Harden 6s, I do like the Harden patch that's at the bottom of that lacing setup. Then you also have that blue lace right above it that's going to run behind underneath that pull tab on the back of the shoe. And Adidas kept the Achilles pillows in Harden's line this year after having those thick pads in the sock liner for last year's model. They stuck with it and honestly made them even bigger and just more noticeable. So, that was interesting there. I mean, I'm not sure they needed to do that, but it didn't really bother me or anything like that. And there also were some waves kind of built into this midsole that I do like a ton more than that just flattened out midsole that the Harden 5s had. I thought it made that design just look a little bit too bulky. So I guess now switching it over to talk about the Harden 5s. Like I just said, I'm not the biggest fan of that flatter midsole that these have. I just don't think it gives them the best look. And, just pointing out a few other aspects on the shoe, you're going to get some text on the inside of that upper, and that like some other Adidas basketball shoes are going to have that as well. Harden's logo is going to show up in a small patch on the tongue, and it's also going to be built into the midsole on the heel too. So, it's not like I dislike this model or anything. I just don't really love it. But now let's go ahead and see how these shoes hold up on the court. So now getting into more of the materials and the performance side, and starting off with the cushioning, the Harden 5s went away from the typical light strike midsole that was used in the Harden Volume 4s, and they went with what Adidas calls a future natural setup. And the whole idea behind this is to create something as close to the human foot as possible. Adidas even did a ton of surveys, just a bunch of studies during this creation, and instead of the upper and the bottom being glued together, this process just uses high pressures and intensity to turn that all into one piece. And I'm not going to lie, I did expect it to be a little bit softer of a feel, especially since you get a combo of boost and light strike, but it's just not really that much of a cushiony feel at all in my opinion. But looking at the Harden 6s, these are going to get a boost cushioning setup, and I think they do play better than last year's model for sure. It's not going to be blow you away soft, personally I don't think, but I am still playing in them, kind of starting to get a better idea about how they feel. But one thing I do know is that they do feel better than the Harden 5s, which was nice. For the materials and the support, the Harden 5s are pretty much covered in textiles from front to back, but they are pretty stiff. I almost mentioned it in the cushioning section, but I think the stiffness of the shoe does affect the comfort a little bit for these. But for the Harden 5s, they're also going to get some really thick Achilles pads within that sock liner, and that was definitely noticeable whenever you had these on. But for the support, these didn't play as well as I would have liked. For whatever reason, my heel would just kind of slip around in this upper, just move around way too much. It was kind of tough to lock my foot into the design. So the upper material is going to be fine on your side to side, but the lockdown just wasn't that impressive on these. But switching it over to the Harden 6s, these have a really different feel from last year. The upper is going to be made out of textiles, but they just aren't as much of a plastic feel. It's kind of tough for me to say what it reminds me of exactly, but it is going to be softer, and it seems like it might be less breathable. It just looks like there's going to be good airflow along the tongue and along that middle sleeve, but most of the upper does feel a little bit closed off for ventilation, so we'll see how good it is. I'm not totally sure yet, but that material is going to be a little bit easier to scuff too. The Harden 5s, it was kind of easy to keep clean because of that plastic casing on the upper, but these are going to show some of those markings a little bit more, which obviously, isn't a big deal. It's just kind of tougher to keep clean if that bothers you. And then the support on the Harden 6 is going to be better in my opinion. There's going to be a gray overlay on the shoe that the laces kind of run through, and tightening that gives you a more secure feel within the design. And I think honestly that does make a big difference on these. And you have some overlays just running along the midsole that will help keep your foot within the shoe too. So just overall, the materials are fine with me, but the support is definitely a spot that Harden's line did take a step forward. But one thing about Harden's line that I don't like for his shoes is they tend to run on the heavier side. The Harden 6 weighs about 512 grams for a size 10.5, and the Harden 5s are about the same, weighing in at 508 grams. But that's for a size 10. So, I mean, up into the 500s is where you start talking about having a heavier shoe, and I mean, you can kind of feel that playing in these. To finish off with traction, the Harden 5s were just flat out one of the most slippery shoes that I've played in. Like, these have the same traction pattern from the 4s, just with no breaks in the design, and it just does not have a lot of grip. I feel like I'm sliding around way too much in these, well, at least more than I should. But moving on to the Harden 6s, these do feel better to play in, and it was time for Adidas to move on from that Harden 5 traction pattern, and I think they made a good decision going with this traditional herringbone pattern that's going to go from the front to the back on these shoes, and they do play pretty nice, and they definitely have a stickier feel that just wasn't there at all on the Harden 5s. It's way more playable design for this year's 6. I did spend some time going back and forth between the two models, and it is pretty clear that the Harden 6 is a big step forward in the traction, so I did love that. But to finish off with sizing, I went true to size on the Harden 6, and I probably could have gone down a little. I do have more room than I'd like at the end of the shoe, and I feel like I should have known better because I only went a half size down on the Harden 5s, and these are still too big. So I would almost recommend looking at going a full size down on the Harden 5s, but a half size for sure in my opinion.
You can't play a player, baby, that's just how the game goes.
So for the final ratings, and starting off with the appearance, I didn't really love the look for the Harden 5s from the jump, but I actually do kind of like the look for the Harden 6s, so I'll go that way to start. For cushioning, it is pretty easy to side with the Harden 6s. I've been pretty critical of the Harden 5s, just how they turned out. But I mean, as for the materials, neither shoe is going to get anything too premium. If anything, I'm kind of tempted to side with the Harden 5s because they're a little more durable. But neither shoe is going to be top tier, so I'm just going to go with a tie for this section. Before the support, it's going to be back with the Harden 6s. They just do a much better job of keeping your foot in the shoe. And then to finish it off with traction, I mean, this is another area where Harden's line improved from last year. I mean, the 6s, they just grip the floor a lot better from what I've noticed so far. So this is going to lead to a pretty lopsided win for the Harden 6 being the better shoe to hoop in. The Harden 6 has honestly made improvements in almost every category, whether it be like the cushioning, the support, or the traction. I mean, those were the three places that the Harden 5s struggled pretty bad. So it was nice to see some improvements made within his line this year. So if you're interested in buying one or both of these shoes and you want to support our channel, we do have an affiliate link in the description that gives us just a little bit of commission that goes back into reviewing more shoes. So feel free to check that out. But that wraps up this performance comparison. Until next review, I'm Landon from Shoeware. Peace.
You can't play a player, baby, that's just how the game goes. All I'm focused on is